so, I thought it might be really interesting to actually show my process on the computer of how I get to do these really intricate laser cut engravings. So let's hop on the computer and let's kind of go through my process and see how I get from the computer to this. So the best way to go about designing is with an AI tool. So Copilot allowed me to generate images that were black over a white background without any shading, no grayscale, no gray. So let's kind of generate a new one and let's build one from scratch. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take my prompt here, I'm gonna copy it, and then let's create this. Yes, okay, now here we are. This one is a good one. And let's move over to our second application. And Affinity Designer is basically an Illustrator alternative for the Mac, which is what I'm on. What I do is I create a mask. So I first need to get an outline of the tele body. So what I have here is a tele mask. And what this is just basically the outline of the tele that crops any image I put behind it too. So for example, I can grab this and I can actually scale it, right? So I can move it around and kind of figure out where this looks good. And this is the whole point. We're using a tool to help us visualize the placement of this. This is indispensable. You wouldn't just slap a design on a tele at random. You have to position this exactly where you want it strategically. And so this allows me to scale, crop, rotate too. So I can even take this image and I can rotate it. And I can also like mirror it too, right? So if I don't think the face is actually oriented or turning the right way, I can flip it, like do a mirror image it. So there's so many options here. And having the ability to manipulate this in an application is, again, indispensable. This is the way you do it. You don't do it any other way. What we're gonna do is we're going to open the one we just downloaded. This is the one, and now I'm gonna copy it, and I'm gonna go into my project, and I'm going to paste it in here, and I'm gonna just drag it into my layer here, and now scale her. And now it's just a question of playing around. Like, where is she gonna look good? But you get the idea. All we're doing is kind of goofing around, playing, finding out what looks good, and kind of trusting our artistic instincts. All right, so I slapped together a couple of AI images and I put them on the body, and let's take a look. We can quickly look at all the different ones back to back and just kind of compare them. Okay, so I settled on my design, and I'm gonna use the face tattoo lady. It's okay that that bridge pickup cavity is obscuring much of the face tattoo. I'm okay with this. It's really all the black in there that's really gonna make this pop. So the next step is to go to another application. I know I've used quite a few applications already, but this is just my workflow and my process, and there's a reason. For now, we're gonna go into Lightburn. There are so many different ways to trace an image, and that is take a raster image, any image you find on the web, and then trace it so that it becomes a vector file. You can do this free on the internet. You can use Adobe Illustrator. You can use a number of other applications like Inkscape. None of them are as good as Lightburn. Lightburn does an exceptional job. I've tried every way to do this. Lightburn is the best. I'm telling you right here. So I'm coming into Lightburn and I'm bringing in two things. I'm bringing in my outline of the tele body. This is an outline without any type of cutouts. It's just the body. And I'm also bringing in the image that I chose. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to select the image and I'm going to right click it. And this is gonna bring up my option for tracing the image. Now, right out of the box with the default settings, I can keep this. I don't have to adjust anything. This is going to be perfect. Now I can come in here and I can zoom in, like let's just say on the flower, and I can just double check that it's doing everything well. I can fade the image to just see how it's tracing. And I also want to kind of zoom in on the reptile skin. This is really important. And I want to make sure that all those little bits of scale are in there. And this looks great. Now I can optimize it by increasing the optimization. I can increase the smoothness. I can do like an ignore or a threshold. I've played with everything. And honestly, just the default settings always does a remarkable job. So what I'm gonna do is just hit OK. it's going to trace my image. Now, to see it and visualize it, what I'll do is I'll use one of my layers. It's already a fill layer. And now I get a really good understanding of what this is going to look like. So remember, all the dark bits that you see in purple are what's going to be engraved and what's going to be scorched on the tele body. And this came out really well, especially her tattoos. All the lotus leaves, everything looks great. So the next thing I want to do is basically mimic what I did here. I want to orient the image in the same manner that I have here. So that means scaling and moving around. And I think we're going to stop here. All right, so the next thing we want to do now is essentially crop all the unnecessary bits. We only wanted to laser what's inside the outline of the tele body, which is why we imported the tele body. Now we're going to crop it. What we'll do is we'll select the tele body, then we'll also select the image, and we'll come over here to the far left, and we want this one here. You can see how it's only in bold on the inside. That means it's going to crop everything outside. Click that, it calculates, and there we go. And look at that. That is my process there. So remember, anything outside the tele body is a waste of time. Now that's certainly an option, but you'll just be sitting there for hours. We only need the laser to work where it needs to work. So let's go ahead and now do the next step, which is export this. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our item, hit export. And what I like to use is SVG. So you could export this as DXF. I work in DXF pretty much 99% of the time because it gives you a lot of control over each individual curve. But for this, what we want is an SVG because it tends to maintain the artistic integrity of the design and the art. I'm now inside the Xtool Creative Space app. So what I've done is I've imported the outline of the body of the tele, but there's something different about this. This also has the center line, and it's essential you have the center line of the outline with the body. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come into my layers, and I'm going to call this outline of tele. I'm also going to give this a color of blue. Now the next thing you want to do is import the SVG file. All right, so my SVG is imported. I just drag it until it snaps over the body, and there it is. So at this point, what I want to do is just set a couple of things up. I want to just call this my lady tattoo, and I'm going to go into fill on hardwood. So fill on hardwood is just what I'm calling the setting that worked really well on the last tele body. And it's essentially a power of 30%. And we're running at 240 millimeters per second. And I believe the lines are at 140 centimeters. Now we're going to go into my tele outline. I'm going to make sure that the output is set to basically off because we don't need this to be engraved or cut. So now what we can do is basically hop onto the laser and align everything. And this is the next portion of this video that's crucial. So the first thing we want to do is set the distance. So what we do is we put the crosshairs over the tele body, and then we hit the button. We're good. So we already identified our center line, and I put a mark at the front and a mark at the back. So what we're going to do now is mark this so that the laser knows exactly where the tele is. We're going to move this crosshair to our center line here, right? So as I move the laser, you can see the crosshair is moving to it. It knows, right? It knows where it is. So I want it to move here. And I want to ensure that the crosshairs is also exactly where it should be here on the screen. And if it isn't, I need to move my body. Crosshair actually needs to move here. Right there will do. And now I just need to move my body so my body aligns with that. It knows where it is. So now I'm just going to make sure my body is straight. So I'm going to move. There you go. That's perfect. All right, so now we're going to start marking. And we're going to use the line. This is like an essential part of this process. And we're gonna give it 2 points. That's the first point. And then we're gonna slide over on this axis and go to my next point. So I know where I am. Just say that's my next point. And so we're ready to go. So we actually can start processing this. Now we're gonna close the lid because that's one of the safety features of the Xtool S1. It won't actually run unless the lid is closed. So next we'll turn the air system X and then we'll hit process. There you go. And we'll just let it do its thing. Look at the texture that it left behind. And this texture isn't from the laser. This texture is from the wood. But it almost has that kind of like whiskey barrel vintage look to it. I mean, I really can't describe it. It's really beautiful in person. And of course, in this particular one, I wanted there to be some depth to it. So it's not an engraving on the surface. This is actually removing material. So you get this really beautiful three-dimensional textured look. And it's quite gorgeous. It really darkened the wood. So it's very, very dark. And this is the trick when you're choosing your file and your artwork. You want there to be as much burning as possible. So you don't want there to be a lot of white space. The white is the wood. The dark is what's being lasered off, and you want as much stuff being lasered off as possible. This one came out absolutely gorgeous because of the contrast between the dark and the light. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful engraving. All the wispinesses of the hair and the snake skin and the cherry blossoms, just gorgeous. This is the second one I did, and as you can see, it's not as dark, and I don't know why, but here's my guess. My guess is that there's a fair amount of moisture in the wood, right? Especially like on the surface. And so what has to happen is obviously the laser has to do its engraving, and if there's any moisture, then that's essentially a variable. So I assume that since these are the exact same settings and the exact same wood, although this grain is much tighter, I assume it has to do with the moisture content in the wood. Look at this beautiful texture. So we were talking a little bit about, you know, when we're in light burn, setting the threshold and the settings to get all this little detail. This is where it's at. All this beautiful detail is gorgeous. And obviously you have the cherry blossoms just looking spectacular. And then we have that interesting effect that it does to the wood. Now the mahogany one I didn't like, clearly, because the contrast is completely wrong. It's a dark scorch on a dark wood, which doesn't really work. And so this did not work. Where you have a lot of natural wood, and that is not what you want. You want to have as much lasering as possible, and then let the actual design be the wood. And that's what I learned. And this is one of the things I learned with this particular mahogany body. So there's nothing wrong with my vector or my artwork. It just looks a little boring and a little plain due to the fact that it's just not contrasty enough. Just look at all those tiny little details, those tiny little things inside the flower petals. That's really hard to reproduce by a human. They're very itty bitty. And it's just extraordinary how much detail you can get. And look at that snake head, it's so cool. And then the woman has sort of like a reptilian, amphibian type skin as well. It's so cool. This one is by far the best one. So cool. This is for sale too, so I'm going to be selling all these bodies. And I'll put them on eBay. Super cheap too. So I couldn't be happier with the results I got from the Xtool S1 and engraving these teles. It was so easy. The setup time is what made it so easy and fun, because this is the first laser I've ever found where setup is super easy and almost built for guitars. You see, on a guitar, we have a center line. It's a known center line. We know where that is. And the Xtool S1 gives us the opportunity to frame using 2 points, which they call a line. So if you give it those 2 points, 1, 2, that's your center line. And setup is a breeze. You put your top in there, you scooch it a bit, align the center line with the line and the Xtool Creative Space app, and you're done. Setup was super easy, and obviously once those center lines are aligned, it's super precise. And that's how I'm getting this precision. And this is just the beginning. This is just like a test. Like, I literally threw this and slapped this together fairly quickly. I mean, you saw the whole process. But think about all the other things you can do. This is without staining. This is without color. This is without any type of top coat. The options are infinite and endless. All you need is your imagination. And it's just crazy to think that we have all these tools now that can really take our imagination and make it just something tangible and practical. Thanks for watching. Take it easy.